Nicole's forward-thinking and vision resulted in developing and creating a state-of-the-art system in infection control healthcare, combining the best of private and not-for-profit healthcare with a focus on pay-it-forward communities. Her common-sense solutions to healthcare standards, safety, service, and delivery is revolutionary. Her research skills have afforded her the opportunity to uncover many deceptions shared with the Canadian people and the original peoples. Recognizing the power belongs to the people, Nicole is not only an advocate for political decolonization, but has spent much of the last 5 years creating and building her practical and common sense message. She is a strong proponent of honoring and implementing the governmental and the Great Law, connecting Canadians and the original people of Turtle Island in unity, in spite of the preferred globalization direction that the present government is implementing, which removes all of Canada's and Indigenous sovereignty in exchange for sort of world governance. So let's welcome her. Okay, are you ready?
Yes!
I'm not. Okay, so I'm going to ask for your patience. This is only my third time speaking, and not about this subject, but close to it. To introduce myself again, my name is Nicole. I'm from Montreal, originally from Témiscamingue, Quebec, and I was raised beside the Kipwa Reserve, Wolf Lake. And my entire background revolved around the Indigenous peoples being one and one with us. So I went to school and then found out, the history, the colonial history. And then when I ended up at Six Nations 5 years ago, I went there for 3 weeks. I'm still there. So I'm having quite the education on Six Nations. So when people tell me when people go to Six Nations, beware, they never come back. It's true. Because I'm not the only one. A friend of mine went for 3 weeks as well. She's been there 12 years. So I still got 7 to go. So anyways, we're going to be starting this presentation. This is Canada's Theft, Genocide, and Death by Legislature and UN Global Governance. So, and why the Tura Wampum is so important to all Canadians. I had the benefit of doing a workshop in Montreal last year with Concordia University students. We just happened to be there, and we were asked, when we spoke about decolonization, what we had found out, they asked for us to do a workshop. So out of all the workshops, only 2 or 3 went to the other ones, and everybody crammed into our little hall. And it was really amazing because the kids in Montreal truly, truly understood what decolonization, political decolonization means. Because when we're discussing this here, it's not about decolonizing the mind only. It's about a political decolonization, which means to remove the paternal relationship if the nations want nation-to-nation negotiations. So I was able to meet a lady by the name of Sharon Venn. Most of you might have already heard about her, but she's extremely dynamic, and she opened my eyes 2 years ago in regards to decolonization. And when she said that self-governance for the nations was just to their reserves and territories, well, there's a different outline meaning to that at the international level. And this is what people have a misconception of. So I've been watching the Occupy movement. I will know more, but this is not about any of the grassroots level movements. What we're going to need here is for Canadians and the First Nations to get together and decolonize the country, unplug the system, because in 1931, we'll discover here that in 1931, the nation should have been at the tables with the government. That's when the Imperial Crown walked away or were forced out by the governing bodies here in Canada. And there was actually a coup d'etat that happened, and you will see it here. Okay, and it was pretty amazing because back then you didn't have the telephones that much. You didn't have the kind of communication that we have today. So what they did is a lot of the acts were no longer there that kind of protected the First Nations. So we'll move on. I'm going to go back here. I was having a sneak peek. Okay. Now here, the Canadian government acknowledges the True Road and the Common Chain in public, but they do not recognize it on paper or within the government websites. They call it the so-called two-row. The only place that I can find documentation on it was in the French government website under Quebec researches. So, being at Six Nations, I was able to learn a lot about the two-row, the dish with one spoon, and the Haudenosaunee peoples. So, during our research within the past 5 years, it was obvious to us as Canadians, other people that work with me, okay, that the two-row treaties among the nations have existed since time immemorial. So it is only common sense that the Haudenosaunee, given their great law teachings and prophecies, would have had incorporated it with all who came across their path, and especially with the newcomers. So there's nothing that they can say that can deny the history of 500 years. So no matter how much the Canadian government denies the two-row treaty's existence, common sense dictates otherwise. Furthermore, the two-row also validates why the Haudenosaunee have always maintained that they were allies to the Crown and were not to be placed under the Indian Act, which makes perfect sense in regards to their many claims over the issues in establishing and maintaining their sovereignty. In the research that we have done with all the letters written to the government, way back when, and handed over to the Privy Council, they maintain that steadiness. We're not supposed to be under the Indian Act. We were allies. We were not supposed to be in this. But when we started searching, we went back to the Supreme Court's court cases, and in there it stated that because Six Nations was considered a band, they lost their case. So we would be able to go today and re-argue that point with what we've uncovered. And I think a lot of people have not been looking in the right places. A lot of the stuff that we found were in places you wouldn't even imagine they stuck the information. So this is what we're about. Now, present day, what's happening in Canada? Stephen Harper is dismantling Canadian sovereignty for globalism. So everything that everybody is fighting for, the tar sands, the pipelines, fracking, the new bills coming in for the Indigenous nations, fee simple ownership only means that the allodial title remains with the Crown. The Crown Corporation of Canada, which is totally different from the Imperial Crown. So here, in an interview that he gave in 2011, in regards to the country's loss of sovereignty, and this is where it affects all Canadians. He says, I know some people don't like it. It is a loss of national sovereignty, but it is a reality. And then he says, as I constantly remind Canadians, there isn't really a Canadian economy anymore. It is a global economy. And the reason for that is that in another PowerPoint that I have that I won't be showing you today because I'll be here till tomorrow, we have a list of the corporations in Canada who have oil and gas. Only in 2 provinces, only 1 First Nation is listed there out of 167. All the other ones are international private corporations. So when people see this, they're listed as Canada, but they're incorporated in Canada, but they don't belong. That oil and gas does not belong to Canada. Neither does the investments. So we have to import our gas and oil in Canada. So yes, it is a global economy because of the fact that they are regulated at the international level. So it's not just about business, because when it's just about business, they wouldn't have brought us Monsanto, they wouldn't have brought us forced vaccinations, and they would not have brought us all of the things that are going on under sustainable development. Sustainable development is actually a very dirty word. So the people who truly understand what that means, it's not what we understand it to mean. So for them, what is unsustainable is us. And then we see it in the reality of what's happening in the United States. So if you want to know what's going on in your own backyard, first you have to see what's going on elsewhere. Because everybody's undergoing the same thing. This is worldwide. So now we move on. So let the lies, deceit, and illusions begin. But first, what is global governance? According to the United Nations, global governance is not government. It is a framework of rules, institutions, and practices that set limits on the behavior of individuals, organizations, and companies. In today's integrating world, there is a clear need for global governance for the good of society, economy, and environment. And a form of global governance is indeed emerging, but the imbalances in the process are cause for concern. Yeah, we should be concerned, because this is where the trap is cast for the United Nations. As the globalization New World Order plan was the ultimate goal in the creation of the United Nations. Canada, the USA, Britain, all of these elite countries are the ones who created the United Nations. So this is why since 1989, there's nothing that has been able to be done in regards to the treaties with First Nations. They're just there to pacify. And if anybody is aware of the Delphi technique and many other brainwashing techniques, you can see it. So I'm glad that I was able to take a stand and try to educate myself as to what was happening. So now we'll move on. So now their globalization strategy is problem, reaction, solution. So mind control and manipulation of the masses at its best. They will create the problem, they will want you to scream, and then they'll offer you the solution, world governance. They want the people to hate their governments here and everywhere else, so that we run to the UN, and then all of a sudden they'll come up and save the day. What's not in this presentation is that a lot of the land claims deals now that they're doing, the new deals, once they sign, the nations sign these deals, they get their lands in fee simple, which means they forfeit a allodial title. Within international decolonization, they get their allodial title back, which means all unoccupied lands in Canada would revert and should revert to the nations. So this is what we're fighting for. Because they will be taken, if Canada has no sovereignty as a country, now they're going after the allodial sovereignty of the nations. So together, unless we want this to happen, we need to stick together. So now, why should the Truro Wampum Treaty be important to all peoples of North America now that globalization is in effect? They've been doing this for years and years and years. The research behind it under sustainable development, smart growth, is just overwhelming. This is coming at the United Nations level, but mind you, the United Nations will say, oh, but we're not forcing any countries, but it is law in Canada. I have all of the acts for it. So here we're looking at this. Although there are many reasons why the Truro Wampum should be important to everyone, two of the most important reasons are due to the facts that our sovereignty as an independent country is undergoing an assault, as well as all the final extermination of the true allodial title sovereignty of the original peoples of Turtle Island within both Canada and the United States, under the guise of globalization. So the effects of globalization: Canada's loss of sovereignty as a country, loss of Indigenous allodial title sovereignty. So the Truro Wampum can stop globalization. It can enforce decolonization and reset the path of all peoples within Canada, and hopefully eventually the United States. But here we're only dealing with 30-some million people. It's not like 330 on the other side. Okay, so the same problems are happening worldwide. However, here in Canada, we can stop the Canadian government and its legislated First Nations assimilation process, the rape of the natural resources, including the stopping of globalization in its tracks, if we are wise enough to see through the lies and deceit of our government and the United Nations by enforcing the implementation of and here's the key, a Truro Wampum living constitution. Right now, Canada has not had a constitution since 1931. The BNA Act is not a constitution. And they've changed things so many times. And without the people's consent, that in 1931, when I was reading about a meeting that they had in England, it's called, what was it called? It's the Imperial Conference. And in that conference, if you're looking at the Balfour Report and the Balfour Declaration, you can see it from 1919 leading up to 1935 on what they did. So back then, what happened is they pushed out the crown, and then they did away with the Indian Lands Act of 1924. We found it. Mind you, this is a book, okay? This is the British North American Acts and Selected Statutes, 1867 to 1962, printed from the Canadian government. It's not in there. It's not. And I'm just wondering how much other stuff will we find in our files that is not in there either. But that takes a lot of time and energy for just a few people trying to do all this. So, now a two-row wampum living constitution, wouldn't that be great? With an Indigenous vision, Canadians, citizens on one side, First Nations on the other. And if you listen to Jody Ray-Boole when she was speaking at the Crown Gathering, she laid it right on the line, 50-50 in Canada. And this is where we could rise 1.2 million people to have the same amount of say as 33 million on each side of the two-row governing Canada together. Walking away from colonialism, or actually that system. That system is so broken, we can't even see through the acts. Everything that they did, what they removed, what they added, what they changed, it's mind-boggling. You sit there and your mind wants to explode. I'm not a lawyer. And when I speak to lawyers, most don't even know any of this stuff. And when you look at how the legal system came about, I was reading the history of the courts in the Yale University history. And it says that they had to create, the clergy created the Vatican, the priests, Protestants, for the kings, they created a legal fiction, which is an entity that is created through your birth certificate, and for First Nations, it's your stamp card. Okay? Canadians, it's our birth certificate. So what they did is they created this legal fiction, this little person here, that's supposed to be you. So what they did is they had actors act as your representation. And that's how they created law. I mean, if I was to go into law and I would read this, I'd have to give my head a shake. Why would I want to go into a profession where I'm creating a fiction in order to have jurisdiction over that person? Because under creator law, they don't have jurisdiction. They can't throw you in jail. So it makes you wonder where's everybody's head is at. So when I ask lawyers, who's the crown? You know, some of my friends were saying, like, who's the crown? Who's the crown? I don't know. I didn't know who the crown was. Now I do. It's a Crown Corporation of Canada. Stephen Harper is your king. The only thing that the Imperial Crown does is act as figure models. And that we are saying, okay, well, they're our royal family, period. So now we'll move on. Now the bottom line is that we as Canadian citizens and the Indigenous First Nations in Canada have two choices. Accept the UN One World Government globalization, or to decolonize Canada within the two-row wampum treaty by creating a new Canadian and First Nations two-row wampum living constitution within a true direct democracy as it was intended for the great law, right roots, white roots of peace. So if we take that and we incorporate that in our communities, as the Haudenosaunee did, I think we'd be more ahead than what we are now, because there's not much choice. Okay, the government cannot stop what they're doing. They are going for globalization. Harper cannot stop it himself, even if we try to force them. We have to stand 16 million people in Canada to do it. To pull this off, we need to claim political decolonization. But the first ones who have to claim it is the First Nations. And then we follow suit, because they cannot claim it without thinking of the citizens in Canada. And I think with the citizens supporting their decolonization, it's a done deal. We don't even need the UN's involvement. We can do it ourselves, because we do not have a true constitution. The one in 1982 is also a false constitution. Because as long as the BNA Act is part of that, and that the people did not have a referendum, it should be null and void. So, how do you like that so far?
Yes.
Okay.
How are we going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just an idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have this gentleman, Mark, here, who says, we sent it to our website, and then he was trying to figure out, Canada, the nation, and we need another living constitution. So we were sitting, talking at the house, and he says, how about the true role living constitution? And we're shooting this back, and oh wow, what a great idea. Talk about a concept, right? So let's go back 500 years and reset everything. And we're intelligent enough that we don't need any outsiders, we don't need the United Nations to do anything. And as soon as political decolonization would be claimed by a proclamation by the nations, they have to give them their funds. And they can't stop the payments. And then we can have a moratorium on everything that is happening in this country that should be illegal, which is the fracking, the tar sands, and everything else. It would stop everything in its track. So, we'll proceed. So now, either way, we need to decolonize the system or accept the UN corporate globalization, which is leaving all Canadian citizens and First Nations with no power and no say in this country. Now, the great example is the Canada-China FIPA deal. Okay, we're going to be stuck in this deal for 31 years. And it says that even if our governments change, they can't change this deal. But I bet you, if we decolonize, we get to determine what we keep and what we throw out. So again, decolonization will stop that. Now, how did the Canadian MPs, past and present, steal Canada from the original peoples? Lied to and manipulated them and Canadians for centuries. This was a research done by Frank J. Tuff, and he explains it well. Now, while the government of Canada enforced attempts of assimilation and cultural genocide, such as Gradual Civilization Act of 1857 and the Gradual Enfranchisement Act of 1869, and in 1876, these acts were consolidated as the Indian Act. So this quote, "The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian people in all respects with the other inhabitants of the Dominion as speedily as they are fit to change." John A. Macdonald, 1887. Now, how ironic that I came down the street a while ago. Okay. So, it started with the Haudenosaunee. The great law was brought to the Haudenosaunee. If it had been practiced and kept up, we would be sitting here looking at the constant genocidal acts that were made against these people. It's time to bring it back. But it's time to bring it back full force because it can not only save Canada, it can save the world. This is how important, that's why I'm still at Six Nations. Because it is so vital that this thing gets spread out worldwide. The great law. What a beautiful concept. We don't need to adopt it all, but at least the basics. And everybody usually has the basics. So, now Judy Saturday, who was supposed to be presenting with me, and I'll have to send out an APB out for her because she was supposed to be in Ottawa coming here. I was in Montreal, so now we're heading home. She went to court for taxation. She was working what she thought was native land, and they were not collecting her taxes. And then she had to go to court for not payment of taxes. So what she said was, in her appeal to the courts, she put in the quote, Duncan Campbell Scott, Duty Superintendent General of Indian Affairs, 1920. His quote was, "Our object is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic and there is no Indian question and no Indian department." She put down to the courts, establishing nationwide Indian residential schools, the process of relocating Indians on a reserve, and the sole purpose of that effect is to get rid of the Indians, forcing us to carry your forms of identification, which is a status card. The status card was and is your entrapment. attempting to frame the land claims process in such a way as to try to extinguish our land and treaty rights, and even to try to turn nations into nothing more than tribes. We continue to exist as a separate nations outside of Canada. And finally, there is the question of morality, both within Canada and on the international stage, by creating a regulation such as the Indian Act, an act respecting Indians, which it does not respect for who I am, evolving with the changes of time. The Indian Act is the most racial and discriminating act of its kind in the world, and she had it right. Because if not for the Indian Act, I don't think that what's going on in Palestine and everywhere else in the world, what happened to the Jews, would have had as much of an impact as what Canada did to the peoples here. So, I'd like to thank Judy for that. When we met, we started discussing decolonization, so she came on board. So now, our Mr. Frank Tuff found the forgotten Constitution. He wrote this. It's the Natural Resources Transfer Agreements and Indian Livelihood Rights from 1925 to 1933. Now, where is that document? What he did in his research, as you'll see, here I posted the Indian Lands Act of 1924. That is not in that book and nowhere to be found online except for a gentleman who went to the archives, produced it, and put it on his website. So we were able to have it. So this act is 3 pages long, not found in the BNA Acts and Statutes of 1867 and 1962. So here we have it. And then we go on to the next one. Here is the Alberta Natural Resources Act. Now this act was done in 1930 when they had their coup d'etat. What they were supposed to do is they were negotiating who's going to handle all unoccupied lands with the First Nations, who's going to negotiate, Canada or the provinces. So when this act came in from the King, or a representative of the King, I should say, here Alberta posted it in their website, but it's under another section, under Indian Affairs. You're not going to find it that easily, but it does say all unoccupied lands are the nations. So to me that was, whoa, wow, okay, great. Because now we know that even at that date, there was no negotiations for those territories. So now we go to the Constitution Act of 1930, and this is how they started dressing it up. And this is where we start seeing the changes. And then we move on to Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, which is the NRTA. When they refer to this as the NRTA, this is really long to read for you, but we're going to have it on our website. And because I'm not that great at PowerPoint presentations, it takes me forever, I put all the information there for people to eventually read, so that I'd be getting, 2 birds with 1 stone here. So anyways, in here it says, a provision for Indian hunting, fishing, and trapping rights stemming from the 1930 transfer of natural resources from the Dominion of Canada to the provinces of Manitoba, Alberta, and Saskatchewan has been an enduring legal controversy. Now, back in 1930, what they're referring to there is the one that they created for Ontario in 1924. It's not in here. Okay? Now, the Natural Resources Department have a little clause in some of the papers we found where they have, for security's sake, some of the natural resources information is not available to anyone. Okay. So now we're going to have to go and see through the Freedom of Information if we can get this information. So, I just wonder what's in there. If it's their document that's in there, we already have it anyway. So maybe we can get them to repost it. So here is the exact wording. Okay, the wording of this paragraph in the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement is often cited by courts and legal academics literature mechanically and completely, without historical depth, when addressing treaty rights in the prairie provinces. And here it says, in order to secure to the Indians of the province the continuance of the supply of game and fish for their support and sustenance. Oh, geez, French people. Canada agrees, you get it. Okay, Canada agrees that laws respecting game enforced in the province from time to time shall apply to the Indians within the boundaries thereof. Provided, however, that the said Indians shall have the right which the province hereby assures to them of hunting, trapping, and fishing game and fish for food at all seasons of the year, on all unoccupied lands, unoccupied crown lands, and on any other lands to which the said Indians may have a right of access. What did they just do? They gave you a right on your own territory. As simple as that. It's how they stole the land. They made it a right. So that everybody like me, okay, innocent little girl here who thought residential schools was a posh place, till I found out otherwise, within my ignorance, it just baffled me. How did they steal this land? Well, it's in that little paragraph, right there. The judge, they went to court, and the judge established that, oh, well, now Indians should have the right to hunt anywhere they want in the province. That's because they knew there was no land claim deals yet. But they gave them that right. So everybody else assumed that they had negotiated that away. So this is basically what this kind of says. So I'm going to fly through this a little bit. But at least you get the gist of it. Okay, so we're going to move on to the, okay, I'm just going to skip again. This is the history. And I don't have anything in bold there, so we're safe. But it's the final wording of paragraph 12 in the Constitution. Actually, I'll read this one, third paragraph. It should be stated that at the outset, that the Indian livelihood provision of the NRTA is a constitutional right. It nevertheless has been given a series of meanings by the courts. But when that was a constitutional right, they had to go back to the table. So this is where they failed to negotiate with the First Nations. Because every time that constitution had to change, they had to agree. Okay? So now, not only have the Indian livelihood rights of the NRTA been interpreted legally without the benefit of considering the records that document the intentions of the drafters or the historical political context in which this amendment to be the BNA Act developed, also became snarled with the Prairie Indian treaties. And basically all they're saying there is that the judges and the lawyers do not do their homework, and they're in a box when they make these judgments without even going back to the history. And right now, if I sat down with most of our politicians, I can guarantee you very few even know your history. What I've learned in 5 years is priceless. So, now the pre-existing treaty livelihood rights are thought to have been altered by the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement. It's all in there. So that's why I was so anxious to come and tell all of you all this. I was just bursting at the seams, right? So now, the inquiry into the surrounding circumstances in which the BNA Act was amended in 1930 has lagged far behind the understandings that courts have given in paragraph 12. So if we were to go back to court and just focus on a small area, we'd be able to win the cases. But lawyers talk too much. So if anybody you know is going to court, make sure that they say that the courts agree in the minutes that they are there to honor your fiduciary duty. Because if they don't, if you don't enforce that, they don't have to. But it should be right in there, in the minutes. So every lawyer that's in there, everybody that walks into that room has to make sure that they provide you with fiduciary duty. And that means they have to be like you and not like them and make the decision. So now we move on. Now this gentleman in native law, Jack Woodward, provided a clear explanation of aspects of the hunting provision by reviewing jurisprudence on such issues as the failure of provincial governments to limit the agreement and the right of access. The key is to how the Canadian government stole Canada's unoccupied lands from the original peoples of Canada within this text. Woodward succinctly explained the court's interpretation of paragraph 12 of the NRTA as entailing a treaty right. The agreements effectively merged and consolidated the treaty rights of Indians in the area and restricted the power of provinces to regulate the Indians' right to hunt for food. This brought about two important differences in the rights themselves. Under the treaties, hunting rights were general. Under the agreements, hunting has been restricted to hunting for food. Under the treaties, hunting rights were restricted to the tract of land surrendered by the treaty, and under the agreements, hunting rights were expanded to the whole area of the prairie provinces. So now, as Woodward and others have reported, courts have created the view that the drafters of the NRTA intended to merge and consolidate treaty hunting rights in the provinces of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. But eventually they did it right across the board. Does that work so well? So, now I'll go directly to the bottom. Intellectual deference to these decisions has meant that the deliberate modification in 1929 of a treaty is regarded as an historical fact. So, now here you can see what the research that did. You can see the years and where they kind of changed. Okay, so here it pretty well says the same thing until it gets to the House of Commons. Now, when you look at the other one, they've changed the word from fully to duly. And this is how it begins. So I'm going to go through them just real quick. And this is how they ended up with the final draft for the Constitution. So just by following this and going through the paragraphs, but we need to do this to all the documents. And that's going to be a long process. But right now we have enough proof and enough information to know that the Canadian government is a whitewash. There are so many laws and acts and everything that we couldn't even fix this, even if we tried. So the best way would be, again, to honor the two-row, create a new constitution within the two-row, a living constitution, and to move forward with what the people want on both sides. So now, we're going to go to, do you have this one? Yes. So while these things have happened, special attention also needs to be given to the years of 1919 to 1935, as these were the most crucial years of the coup d'etat committed against the First Nations in Canada and to the Canadian peoples. It was during these times that the Imperial Crown was removed from Canadian law jurisdiction and turned into the Crown Corporation of Canada. They were no longer able to create or dictate our laws. A new constitution should have been agreed upon by everyone in Canada. Canadians and the First Nations should have been at the tables along with the Imperial Crown and our government officials. However, this was denied and hidden from all. And so the Canadian government's illusions begins. And we have a conversation when they're discussing what they're going to do, which they had taken minutes. It was kind of like an inquiry. And in there they state, well, we don't want to start asking the people in Canada what to do, because in the United States it took them 12 years to accept the Constitution. So here in Canada, all we're going to do is convince the provinces, the premiers of each province, to come along with this. So now we're missing another document, Quebec. Quebec is another key. Why is Quebec so different? I would put my hand in fire that Quebec had a treaty with Canada, because that's one of the apparent, how can I say, it's not a fact, but implications, yes, thank you. That Quebec would have done that. And it only makes sense, because when we're reading this document, the provinces did not agree to what they were doing. And this is where Quebec still agreed to work with the feds to collect taxation. But the Canadian government has no business in Quebec law. What does that tell you? That whole referendum they had was an illusion. That was a game. Because people were getting too smart. 1982 Constitution, another game. Oh my God, they're waking up. We got the Constitution, we got a fake one. Okay? So it's, you know, so DNA research conclusions. It's kind of ironic that now we have to go back to the DNA of North America here. And one of my friends says, Nicole, decolonized North America is DNA. I'm like, oh gosh, yeah, you know, pretty cool. So now we're going to switch our DNA and redo it right. So now our research conclusion is, given this information and other considerations, and of the constant evidence of corruption within our parliament for the last 2 centuries, it is, of my opinion and conclusion, which is so blatantly obvious to anyone researching deep enough to see that the theft of native lands in Canada was also done by extending hunting and fishing treaty rights to Indians within the entire province, instead of only being within the surrendered territories. The unoccupied lands in each province across Canada were already the Indians' land to begin with, to do as they please, and not just to fish and hunt. Now the reason I use the term Indian here is because they did treaties with Indians, not Aboriginals, not First Nations. So in a court, it would not stand, because they would say no jurisdiction. Okay, you have to use the exact words from the treaties. So, thus making these illegal changes gives the assumption to the common person that the Indians gave away all of their lands and only have their reserve lands and have hunting and fishing rights off reserve. Period. Common sense dictates that the thefts of native lands were stolen by ways of making changes to legislation over and over and rewriting the text by changing words here and there to have everyone eventually believe that the Indians had agreed to surrender the lands in all the provinces and only kept their hunting and fishing rights in exchange for education and health care, among a few other things, depending on their treaty negotiations. Okay. So, now, all other unoccupied lands were always the intent, that it was to remain theirs within treaty negotiations. One of the reasons why I make this statement in this paragraph there is to make it clear to Canadians that the only times that when they did the treaties, they still kept hunting and fishing rights on surrendered lands. And that was it. That's how it went. So it makes it a lot clearer. So I was told I have to kind of wrap it up. So we're going to go to this. So as conscious Canadians, we should and must support a complete First Nation political decolonization. And here we have Stephen Harper and the Premier of Quebec, Liberal. And I brought this here. This is a program that says, in 2009, for the last 15 years, they were having meetings in Montreal on globalization, world governance, and we have a document in our website. So, to their own words, adapting to a new world order. It's not propaganda, it's fact. So, then you wonder why now the police are stopping everybody and claiming mental health issues. When we come out with things like this, they think we're lying, but it's the truth. So, here as a Canadian citizen, I am ashamed of this country's history and politicians, and what we as Canadians have allowed to happen to the true Indigenous peoples of North America, Turtle Island, the original peoples of this land. This is why many of us believe that given our government's corruption, we must educate the peoples of Canada, enforce referendums, remove, through direct democracy, final decision-making authority in all levels of Canadian governance, and to finally politically decolonize this corrupted system and of ourselves by working alongside the First Nations of Canada within the framework and honor of the Two-Row Wampum Treaty that Canada's leadership has always refused to respect. Together, we can create a new Canadian Constitution with an Indigenous vision, perhaps named the Two-Row Wampum Living Constitution, for all to live by and honor, and to further help stop an out-of-control globalization scheme and theft of the planet's natural resources. So this is the remedy solution. Come together, do what we need to do. And this is the paper that I've given everybody. And now, so what will the peoples of Canada do? Now it's up to us to decide. So thank you very much for your time, and this will be posted on our website.